I had always thought of myself as someone who would never be taken advantage of, someone who could see the good in people, even when they didn't always deserve it. I married Frank 5 years ago, after both of us had gone through our fair share of heartbreaks. He had lost his first wife to a long illness, and I'd been through a failed marriage that left me with more emotional scars than I'd like to admit. But Frank was different. He was kind, attentive, and had a way of making me feel safe, something I hadn't felt in a long time. And his son Jason, from his first marriage. Well, I thought he was just a troubled teenager trying to find his way. I was ready to help him. We were a family, or so I believed. I put everything into making sure Frank and Jason felt loved and cared for. I cooked the meals, I did the laundry, I made sure the house was in order, and most importantly, I gave them my time. When Frank and I decided to start a family of our own, it was as if everything had finally fallen into place. But I didn't expect what was about to come, and I never saw it coming from the person I trusted most, Jason. I had just turned 45, and after years of trying, I was finally pregnant. It wasn't an easy pregnancy, and I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. But it was a new beginning for me, a chance to have a child of my own, someone I could love and protect from the cruelty I'd faced in the past. I was determined to give my baby the kind of life I never had growing up, filled with love, safety, and security. But things began to change after I found out I was pregnant. Jason, who had been distant but polite, started acting differently. There was a certain coldness in his eyes, a sense of entitlement I hadn't noticed before. At first, I thought it was just the stress of being a teenager, but then it escalated. One evening, Frank and I were sitting at the dinner table when Jason stormed in, looking like he was about to explode. "You're pregnant," he spat, his face contorted in disbelief. I nodded, trying to smile through the exhaustion. "Yes, Jason, Frank and I are very excited." Jason's eyes widened, then narrowed, and he looked at me with a look I could barely comprehend. "So you're going to have a kid, and you think you're going to just give everything to that baby? What about me? What about all the things I've done for you?" I blinked, completely caught off guard by his words. Frank looked just as stunned as I did. But Jason wasn't done. He continued, his voice dripping with a mixture of jealousy and anger. "You know, I've always been around, always helping out, and now you're just going to toss me aside for some baby?" Jason's voice trembled with fury. "You've never given me anything. It's always been about you and Frank. I thought you actually cared about me, but clearly I was just a means to an end. This is what it's all been about, hasn't it?" I felt my heart drop in my chest as his words sank in. For a moment, the room was silent. The air felt thick, suffocating. How had I missed this? How had I failed to see the resentment building inside of him? I thought I was doing everything right, that I had been a good stepmother, someone who had tried to make him feel welcome and loved. But clearly, I was wrong. And what stung the most was realizing that all of it, the cooking, the cleaning, the nurturing, wasn't appreciated. To Jason, I was just a provider, a resource to be exploited, a tool to get what he wanted. "You don't get it, do you?" Jason's voice was low, almost too calm. "You think I'm going to be your family just because you have a baby now? I'm not stupid. I know what you're doing. You're going to change everything. You'll leave everything to that kid. And what am I going to get? Nothing." Frank finally spoke, his voice trembling with confusion. "Jason, that's enough." But Jason wasn't finished. He turned to me, his face twisted with something darker than just anger. "You've always been the one who took care of things. I'll bet you're going to leave it all to the baby, won't you? All the money, all the property, all of it. Just like that, after everything I've done for you." The rage in his eyes sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just jealousy anymore. It was something deeper, something ugly. I realized in that moment that Jason didn't just want attention or love. He wanted control. He wanted everything I had, and he wanted it on his terms. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I was stunned. My head was spinning. My own stepson, the boy I had tried to care for and protect, was more concerned about what he could gain from me than any kind of relationship. And the worst part, I realized, with a sharp sting of sadness, that I had been so blinded by my desire to create a happy family that I had overlooked the signs of manipulation, of his growing sense of entitlement. As I stood there, trying to process what had just been said, Jason's words continued to echo in my mind. He was right about one thing. I was going to leave everything to the baby. I wasn't going to let him or Frank guilt-trip me into giving up what was rightfully mine. But what struck me most was that the family I thought I had been building wasn't the family I had at all. The truth was, I had been nothing more than a resource, a stepping stone, and now it felt like my entire world was crumbling around me. It was in that moment that I made the decision that would change everything. I had to protect myself and my baby. I wasn't going to let Jason's manipulation or Frank's silence control my future. The love and devotion I'd given them, the years I had spent trying to be a good wife and stepmother, meant nothing to them now. And it was clear, if I was going to protect my future, I would have to do it alone. It was hard, facing the reality that my own family, the ones I had fought so hard to build, could betray me so easily. But it was also the moment I realized something important. I wasn't just a victim in this situation. I had the power to choose my path, to reclaim my life. And as painful as it was, I knew I had to leave everything behind and start anew, for myself and for the baby growing inside of me. The decision to leave wasn't easy. For years, I had given myself fully to Frank and Jason. I thought I had finally found a place where I belonged, a family to love and care for, a life to call my own. But after that night, after Jason's outburst, everything changed. I no longer saw them as my family. They weren't the people I had trusted with my heart. They were just strangers hiding behind the guise of kinship, using me for their own gain. I spent the next few days in a blur of emotions, anger, sadness, disbelief. I kept replaying that moment over and over in my head, trying to understand where I had gone wrong. How had I allowed myself to be manipulated so easily? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I had sacrificed so much of myself, so much of my happiness, for people who didn't appreciate it. And the worst part? They never would. I remember standing on the porch that evening, staring at the sunset. The warm orange and pink hues stretched across the sky. And for a moment, I let myself be lost in the beauty of it. It was peaceful, calming, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. The house behind me, the life I had built with Frank and Jason, it felt suffocating, like a cage I had locked myself in without even realizing it. As the wind gently blew through my hair, I allowed myself to feel the weight of the decision I was about to make. It wasn't just about leaving Frank or Jason. It was about reclaiming my life, my autonomy, and my future. For so long, I had been living for them, putting their needs before my own, believing that it was my duty to make them happy. But in doing so, I had lost sight of who I was. I had lost sight of what made me happy. The idea of starting over was both terrifying and liberating. I was 45 years old, pregnant with my first child, and I had no idea what the future would hold. I wasn't sure where I would go or how I would manage on my own. But what I did know was this: I couldn't stay in a relationship that was suffocating me. I couldn't continue living in a place where I wasn't valued, where my love and sacrifices were nothing more than a means to an end. I made up my mind then. I was going to leave. I would pack my things, go somewhere far from all of this, and start fresh. I didn't know exactly how or when, but I knew that I had to leave the toxic environment behind if I was going to protect myself, and more importantly, my baby. The next morning, I started making plans. I called Emma, an old friend from college who had always been there for me, even when I was struggling in my marriage to my ex-husband. She was one of the few people I trusted completely, and I knew she would understand. I told her everything about Jason's outburst, about my pregnancy, about the broken relationship I was trying to salvage. She didn't hesitate for a second. She offered me a place to stay, a safe haven where I could figure out what to do next. I began looking into my finances. Frank and I had always kept things joint, but I had always been the one handling the bills and accounts. It was time to take control of my own financial future, to make sure I had the resources to support myself and my baby. I didn't want to rely on anyone anymore, especially not Frank or Jason. I wasn't sure where I'd go from here, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let them control me any longer. The hardest part was telling Frank. He didn't understand at first. He tried to talk me out of it, pleading with me to stay, to work things out, to try and fix our family. But how could I fix something that was already broken? How could I fix something when the person I had trusted most, the person who was supposed to be my partner, couldn't even see the damage they had caused? Frank wasn't innocent in all of this. He had always defended Jason, always downplayed his behavior. He'd never truly seen me, never truly understood what I was going through. And that was the final nail in the coffin. I couldn't stay with someone who couldn't even see the truth. So I made the call. I told him that I was leaving. The look on his face, the shock, the betrayal, it was hard to bear, but it was necessary. I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing it for me and for the baby. It felt surreal, walking around the house, packing my things. I remember looking at the life we had built, the home we had made together, the pictures on the walls, the cozy furniture, the kitchen where we had shared so many meals. It was all a lie. None of it meant anything if it didn't come with respect, love, and true partnership. The night I left, I drove away with a sense of relief. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the most freeing. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing. I was no longer going to let anyone, least of all Frank and Jason, define my worth. I was going to build a new life, a life that was mine, a life I could be proud of. And I was going to do it for my baby because this time, I was putting myself first. As I drove down the road toward Emma's house, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The future was uncertain, but I felt stronger than I ever had before. I was taking control of my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone stand in my way. This was my time to start over, and nothing, not even the past, was going to hold me back. The days following my departure were a whirlwind of emotions, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. The hardest part was behind me, leaving Frank and Jason, and now it was time to focus on what truly mattered, me and my baby. I had a lot of decisions to make, but for the first time in years, I felt like I had a sense of control over my own life. It wasn't easy, though. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I had made the right choice. But every time I looked down at my growing belly, I reminded myself why I had to leave. I had to protect my future, and that meant starting over from scratch. I had always been independent, but being thrust into this new chapter of life, pregnant, alone, and uncertain, was more overwhelming than I could have anticipated. I felt isolated. My old life had been surrounded by Frank, Jason, and their world, and now it was just me and my unborn child in a completely unfamiliar situation. It was scary, and there were days when I wondered how I would make it through. But I knew I couldn't give in to fear. I had made the decision to take charge, and I wasn't going to let self-doubt sabotage that. One evening, after spending hours scrolling through my phone and researching legal advice and financial planning, I came across an old number in my contacts, Emma. It had been years since we last spoke, but I always remembered her as a kind and reliable friend from college. She had been the one person I could always talk to when life felt overwhelming. And for some reason, in that moment, reaching out to her felt like the right thing to do. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how she would react after all this time. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Emma was someone I could trust. I picked up the phone and dialed. "Hello?" Her voice on the other end was warm and familiar, just like I remembered. It was like no time had passed at all. "Hey, Emma, it's Rachel. I know it's been a while." I paused, unsure of how to explain everything that had happened, but I didn't need to say much. She listened to me pour out the entire story, about leaving Frank and Jason, about being pregnant at 45, about starting over and trying to figure out what to do next. Emma didn't interrupt, and when I finished, she simply said, "You're not alone, Rachel. I've got your back." Her words were like a lifeline. Just hearing her say that made me feel less alone. Emma offered me a place to stay, a safe space where I could regroup and get my bearings. She told me she'd help me with anything I needed, whether it was finding a lawyer, setting up a support system, or just having someone to talk to. She was a true friend, and her offer meant more to me than I could express. Within a few days, I packed up the essentials and made my way to her apartment. Emma greeted me with open arms and a warm smile, and I instantly felt a sense of comfort that had been missing for so long. Her place was cozy, filled with books and plants, and it felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could breathe, where I could finally let go of the weight of the past. As I settled in, I realized just how much I needed Emma's support. She was a single mother herself, and though our lives had taken different paths since college, she understood what it meant to face challenges head-on. Emma was the kind of person who could offer not just practical help, but emotional support as well. She encouraged me to take things one day at a time, reminding me that this new chapter was an opportunity for growth, not just for survival. Emma didn't just offer me a roof over my head, she gave me the emotional space to heal. We spent long evenings talking over tea, discussing everything from my hopes and fears to the practical steps I needed to take to secure my future. Emma's unwavering belief in me helped restore the confidence I had lost. She reminded me that I was stronger than I gave myself credit for, and that I had the ability to create a future on my own terms. She wasn't going to let me wallow in self-pity. She was going to help me stand up again. One afternoon, while we were sitting in a cozy cafe near her apartment, Emma looked over at me with a mischievous smile. "You've got this, Rachel. You're going to be an amazing mom, and I'll be here every step of the way to make sure you have everything you need." Her words brought tears to my eyes. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that. It was one thing to hear it from my own mind, but hearing it from someone I trusted, someone who truly believed in me, was a turning point. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time since leaving, I felt like maybe I could really do this. Maybe, just maybe, I could create a life that was entirely mine, where I was free from manipulation and control. Emma helped me find a lawyer to start the process of protecting my assets and ensuring that everything I had worked for would go to my child. She helped me navigate the complicated emotions that came with leaving Frank and Jason, offering me a safe space to process everything. I knew I wasn't out of the woods yet. There would still be battles ahead, especially with Frank and Jason, but with Emma's support, I felt like I had the strength to face whatever came my way. In that cozy cafe, as I looked at Emma's smiling face, I realized that this was the beginning of something new. No longer was I just a woman trapped in a toxic relationship. I was a mother, a survivor, and most importantly, I was reclaiming my life. And I wasn't doing it alone. Emma was there, and so was the tiny life growing inside me, reminding me every day that I had a purpose, that this was only the beginning of my journey. With that support, I could move forward with hope, with strength, and with the knowledge that the future was wide open. The day I received the news about my inheritance was one of the most unexpected and relieving moments of my life. After years of living in a kind of financial limbo, with Frank always making sure I was dependent on him for support, I learned that my late mother had left me a significant sum of money. It wasn't just a small inheritance. It was enough to give me the financial freedom I had always dreamed of, but never thought would come my way. Suddenly, I wasn't just a woman with a baby on the way. I was a woman with options, with choices, with a future I could actually shape. The relief was immediate. The weight of financial stress had always been a looming cloud over my head. I had spent years feeling like I was constantly playing catch-up, always giving more than I received, especially in my marriage to Frank. He had always controlled the purse strings, making sure I didn't have the freedom to make major decisions on my own. I had put up with it for the sake of keeping the peace, for trying to make our family work. But with this inheritance, everything changed. You know how much we've struggled financially, and it would only be right for you to share some of that with me and Jason. This is a family matter, after all. I had to fight to hold back my anger as I listened to him try to manipulate me into giving him a portion of what was rightfully mine. It was as if everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed, meant nothing to him. His entitlement was so ingrained that he genuinely believed he could convince me to just hand over a part of my inheritance to him. The nerve of him. "Frank," I said, trying to stay calm, "this inheritance is mine, and I have every intention of using it for my future and my child's. I don't owe you or Jason anything. I've been more than generous with my time and support, and I'm done with that." The conversation ended on a tense note, but I wasn't going to back down. I had made up my mind. The days that followed were filled with phone calls from Frank, trying every trick he could think of to guilt-trip me, to manipulate me into reconsidering. But I had learned, over the course of my marriage to him, that he would always find a way to turn things around to benefit himself. I couldn't let that happen anymore. To make sure everything was legally protected, Jennifer and I worked together to ensure that my will was updated, making it clear that my inheritance and everything I owned would go to my child. No one else. I wasn't going to let Frank or Jason dictate my future any longer. I was taking control. As I walked out of Jennifer's office after finalizing the paperwork, I felt a sense of empowerment I had never known before. I had taken the necessary steps to protect myself and my unborn child. This wasn't just about securing financial stability. It was about reclaiming my life from the control that Frank and Jason had tried to impose on me. I was no longer at their mercy. But I knew this wasn't over. Frank and Jason would fight me every step of the way. They wouldn't take this lightly, and I was prepared for the battles ahead. They had underestimated me for far too long. They thought they could manipulate me, guilt-trip me, and control me, especially with my baby on the way. But they had no idea who they were dealing with now. In the days that followed, I received a letter from Frank's lawyer demanding that I reconsider my will and my decisions regarding the inheritance. The letter was full of legal jargon and veiled threats, but I was unfazed. I had a team of professionals on my side now, and I wasn't going to let Frank intimidate me any longer. This was about more than money. It was about my right to live my life without interference from people who only saw me as a means to their own ends. With the legal battle looming, I focused on the next chapter of my life. I made plans to move into a small apartment on the outskirts of town, away from the toxic influence of Frank and Jason. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I was determined to build a life of independence. My baby and I were going to thrive, and nothing was going to stop me from making that happen. Every decision I made from that point forward was for my future, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take that away from me. The financial freedom I had gained was just the beginning. It was time to move forward with confidence, knowing that no matter what happened next, I was in control. The moment Jason found out about the inheritance, I knew there was no avoiding the confrontation. It was just a matter of when and how ugly it would get. For weeks, Frank had been whispering in Jason's ear, fueling his sense of entitlement. Jason had always been a bit spoiled, but once he learned that I wasn't going to share my inheritance with him, his resentment reached a boiling point. It was a Saturday afternoon when Jason showed up at my apartment. I hadn't seen him in weeks, not since I had moved out of Frank's house. He knocked on the door, and I could already hear the anger in his voice through the thick wood before I even opened it. "Rachel, we need to talk," Jason said, pushing past me as soon as I cracked the door open. His expression was a mix of fury and confusion, like he couldn't understand why I was doing this to him. I didn't invite him in. I wasn't going to let him have the upper hand anymore. I stepped back, keeping a cool distance between us. "You're right, we do need to talk," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But not the way you think." Jason's eyes narrowed as he looked around the apartment, taking in the modest furnishings and the small space I'd moved into. I wasn't living in luxury, but it was mine. It was a start, and that was enough for me. "You really think you can just cut me out of everything?" he snapped, his voice rising with each word. "I've been here for you, I've been family, and now you're telling me I don't deserve anything? This is my inheritance too, and you can't just leave me out like this." The audacity of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was as if everything I had done for him and Frank didn't matter at all. Jason hadn't been there for me when I needed help. He hadn't been a supportive stepson or a kind person when I was struggling. No, he had been using me, just like Frank, whenever it suited him. I realized in that moment that this wasn't about fairness or family. This was about greed. "Jason," I said, forcing myself to speak calmly, though my anger was bubbling just beneath the surface. "I've done everything for you and Frank. I've sacrificed so much. And now that I finally have something for myself, you think you can just take it from me? You think I owe you?" He took a step forward, his eyes flashing with anger. "You owe me everything. I grew up with you. I took care of you. And now you're just going to turn your back on me, just like that." I felt the sting of his words, but I couldn't let him see that it was working. I had to stay strong. "No, Jason, I'm not turning my back on you. I'm simply taking back what's mine. I'm not your ATM. I'm not your personal bank. You're not entitled to anything from me anymore. Not after everything that's happened." He clenched his fist, his face red with rage. "You think you can just walk away from us and live your little life? What about Frank? What about everything we've been through together?" The mention of Frank's name made my heart sink. I had spent so much time trying to make that marriage work, trying to be the supportive wife and stepmother. But now I saw how little it all mattered. Frank had always been the one pulling the strings, manipulating both of us. And Jason, he was just his puppet, blindly following his father's lead. "Frank has nothing to do with this," I said, feeling my voice grow firm. "I'm done with all of it. I'm done with you and Frank trying to control me. This is my life now. My child is my priority." Jason's face twisted in disbelief. "So that's it? You're just going to leave everything behind? And I'm supposed to just sit here and watch you take it all?" I stood taller, feeling the weight of my decision. "Yes, that's exactly it. I'm moving on, and I'm not sharing anything with you." The silence between us felt like an eternity. For a moment, Jason just stared at me, as if waiting for me to cave, for me to soften. But I wasn't going to. I had made up my mind. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let anyone manipulate me into feeling guilty or ashamed of my choices. "You really are heartless, aren't you?" he said, his voice dripping with venom. I could feel my blood boiling, but I kept my cool. "No, Jason, I'm not heartless. I'm finally putting myself first for once, and you should do the same. Stop thinking that you're entitled to everything. You need to start taking responsibility for your own life." Jason didn't say another word. He stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, staring at the closed door, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was no fear in me anymore. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I had stood up for myself, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially not Jason, make me feel small again. I knew the confrontation with Jason was just the beginning. There would be more battles ahead, but I was ready for them. I wasn't going to let my past define me anymore. I was reclaiming my future, and no one was going to take that from me. Not Frank, not Jason, not anyone. This was my fight now, and I was going to win. As the weeks went by, the changes in my body became impossible to ignore. I had been so focused on surviving, on putting out the fires that Frank and Jason had set in my life, that I hadn't given much thought to what was really happening inside me. But now, with each passing day, the reality of my pregnancy hit me harder, and yet somehow it also started to ground me. There was something incredibly powerful about carrying life, something that made me feel more whole, more capable than I had ever felt before. I was going to be a mother, and this baby, my baby, was mine to protect, nurture, and love. I wasn't going to let the toxic relationships I had spent years in dictate the kind of life I was going to give my child. I was done letting other people's needs and expectations take precedence over my own. I'd started attending prenatal classes. At first, I felt like I didn't belong, like I was too old, too out of touch with what other mothers my age were doing. But the more I went, the more I realized that age didn't matter. There were women of all ages, from all walks of life, and we all had one thing in common. We were all about to embark on the journey of motherhood. It was humbling, really, to see that there were so many different paths that led to the same destination, parenthood. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My new friend Emma had been an incredible support through all of this. She was younger than me, but she had a wisdom about her that made me feel like I wasn't alone. She'd been through her own struggles, and despite her own difficult circumstances, she never once made me feel like I was a burden. Emma had a way of making everything feel lighter. She'd invite me over to her apartment, where we'd talk for hours, laugh at silly things, and just enjoy each other's company. It was those moments, those small acts of kindness, that helped me remember that I wasn't isolated. I wasn't abandoned. I had people who cared. When I'd first moved out, I was so terrified of being alone. I thought that leaving Frank and Jason would mean cutting ties with everything, my past, my family, my identity. But as I spent more time reflecting on my life, I realized that I was not defined by them. I was defined by my own strength, my own decisions, and the love I had for my unborn child. I had spent too many years living for others, sacrificing myself for people who would never appreciate it. But now I was living for me and for my baby. I spent more time outdoors, taking long walks in the park, or just sitting quietly on a bench, reflecting. The world seemed different somehow, brighter, more hopeful. Every step I took, every breath I inhaled, I could feel myself growing stronger. There was power in solitude, power in taking control of your own life. And with each passing day, my confidence grew. One afternoon, as I sat in the park, the sun gently warming my face, I realized something profound. I had stopped seeing myself as a victim. I wasn't some tragic figure who had been abandoned and left to suffer. I was a woman who had been through hell and come out the other side. I was resilient. And I was about to become a mother, which, in its own way, was the most empowering thing I had ever done. I felt a deep connection to the baby growing inside me, and I was more determined than ever to give this child the life I had never been given. One filled with love, stability, and above all, the knowledge that they were always worthy of respect, of kindness, and of a family that cherished them. As my belly grew round, I began to notice the way people looked at me differently. There was a certain tenderness in their gaze. People on the street, in the stores, even strangers who smiled at me. It was as if they could sense the strength I was carrying with me. I wasn't just pregnant. I was a woman who had found herself again. A woman who had stood up for her rights and chosen herself and her child over all the chaos of her past. I wasn't perfect. I didn't have it all figured out. But for the first time in my life, I didn't need to. All I needed to focus on was what was right in front of me, my baby, and the future we were going to have together. The world may have tried to knock me down, but I wasn't going to stay down. The pregnancy wasn't easy. There were nights I couldn't sleep, mornings I felt nauseous, days I struggled with the physical toll it was taking on my body. But there was also joy in every kick, every movement, every sign that my baby was growing stronger. And I knew, deep down, that this child was going to be the one thing in my life that would never let me down. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. And with that realization came a new sense of purpose. I wasn't going to let anyone take this away from me, especially not Frank or Jason. They had already taken so much from me. But my future, my child, was mine to protect. And nothing was going to take that away from me. The day Jason gave me his ultimatum was one I will never forget. I had been preparing for this moment, but nothing could have prepared me for the anger and bitterness that poured out of him. For weeks he had been trying to manipulate me, either into changing my will or convincing me to give him some of the inheritance that was meant for my baby. I had stood firm every time, refusing to let him guilt-trip me into giving up my newfound independence. But I could see in his eyes that this time was different. I had been in the living room, sorting through some old boxes of things I didn't need anymore, when Jason stormed in. His face was red, his jaw clenched, and I could feel the rage emanating from him. He slammed the door behind him so hard that it rattled the entire frame. "I've had enough of this, Rachel," he shouted. "I've put up with your selfishness for too long. You're throwing everything away for this baby that isn't even mine. You owe me. You owe Frank and me. We've taken care of you for years, and now you're going to abandon us for some little parasite." His words hit me like a slap across the face, but I didn't let him see how much they hurt. I refused to let him see me crumble. "I've never asked you to take care of me, Jason," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the flood of emotions rising in my chest. "I didn't ask for your charity. I never needed your approval. But I am asking you to respect my decision. I'm doing what's best for my baby, and that means not giving you or Frank any part of my future. I've made my choice." Jason's eyes darkened, and he took a step closer, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can just walk away from us? You think you can cut us out of your life and leave us with nothing? Number. You're not going anywhere. You don't get to do this to me. If you don't change your will, if you don't give me something, anything, I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are. I'll make your life hell." His words were meant to intimidate me, to make me fear him. And for a brief moment, I felt a shiver run down my spine. But then I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't the woman I had been when I first moved in with Frank and Jason. I had grown stronger. I had learned to stand up for myself, even if it meant standing alone. "I've already made my decision," I said, my voice unwavering. "You can't manipulate me anymore, Jason. I won't let you control me. And if you want to make my life hell, then go ahead. But I won't be a part of your toxic game anymore." Jason stood there for a moment, staring at me with wide, furious eyes. I could see the conflict in him. He was trying to decide if he could break me or if he should back down. He was used to having control over me, to making me feel guilty for everything, but not anymore. I had finally found my voice, and I wasn't going to let him silence me again. His fist clenched, but he didn't move. "You think you can just walk out on me and Frank and expect everything to be fine? You'll regret this." "I already regret wasting so much time on you," I said. And those words hit him harder than anything else I could have said. "But I won't regret this. I won't regret putting my baby first, and I won't regret walking away from you." I turned my back to him and began packing my bags. I didn't need to explain myself further. The decision had been made, and there was no going back. Jason's voice followed me as I moved around the room, packing up the last of my things. "You're a selfish, cold-hearted woman. You'll regret this. You'll see?" But I didn't look back. I knew that my future, my child's future, depended on me walking away from this toxic environment. I had spent years trying to please people who never cared about me, who never respected me. And now, I was done. I left the house that day, my heart heavy, but my resolve stronger than ever. I wasn't just walking away from Jason and Frank. I was walking towards something better, toward a future where I could be the mother I needed to be. A future where I wasn't bound by guilt or manipulation. As I walked out the door, the weight of everything I had endured seemed to lift just a little. I wasn't looking back. I wasn't going to let anyone control me again. I was done. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Jason might have thought he could break me, but he was wrong. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. And I was never going to let anyone take that away from me again. It was the day the will was going to be read, something I had been dreading for weeks. As much as I tried to stay focused on my new life, Jason and Frank's looming presence always hovered in the background, a constant reminder of the drama I had left behind. They knew I had made my decision about my inheritance, and they weren't happy about it. I had made sure to meet with my lawyer well in advance, securing everything I wanted to leave to my baby, no strings attached. Frank and Jason, though, they had tried everything to change my mind. Jason had even gone so far as to show up at my new apartment, offering what seemed like an olive branch, only to demand that I share the inheritance with him, claiming that I owed him something after all the sacrifices he had made for me. But I knew better now. I wasn't the same woman who had once been desperate for their approval. I was strong, determined, and I had made a decision that I wouldn't back down from. The lawyer's office was cool and sterile, with gray walls and sleek furniture. It felt like a stark contrast to the storm swirling in my mind as I waited. I was the first to arrive, and I could feel the tension in the air, even though I tried to stay calm. Frank and Jason would be joining us shortly, and I knew the moment they stepped into that room, they would do everything they could to twist the situation to their favor. They were already angry about the terms of the will, and I knew they would be furious when they saw the truth laid out before them. The door opened, and Frank and Jason walked in, both wearing expressions of guarded anger. They sat across from me, their eyes flickering with contempt. Jason's usual cocky smile had been replaced with a tight-lipped scowl, and Frank didn't even try to hide the irritation in his posture. "Rachel," Frank began, his voice more composed than I had expected, though the underlying venom was clear. "We know you've made your decision, but we want to remind you, this family has supported you, and you can't just turn your back on us now." I met his gaze without flinching, my hands resting calmly in my lap. "I've made my decision, Frank, and it's final. I'm not turning my back on anyone. I'm doing what's right for my baby." Before either of them could respond, the lawyer entered with the official documents. The moment felt surreal, like everything had been building to this singular point. I took a deep breath, mentally preparing myself for what was to come. I had made it this far. There was no turning back now. The lawyer sat down and opened the envelope, his eyes scanning the contents of the will. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "As stipulated in this will," he began, "Rachel has decided to leave her entire estate and inheritance to her unborn child, to be held in trust until the child reaches adulthood. There are no provisions for Frank or Jason." The silence in the room was deafening. Frank's face flushed, and Jason let out a sharp laugh that held no humor. "You can't be serious," Jason sneered, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You're really going to leave everything to a child who hasn't even been born yet? What about us? We've been there for you. We deserve something." I could feel my heart pounding, but I refused to let his words rattle me. "You don't deserve anything, Jason. You've never been there for me, not really. You've always seen me as a way to get ahead, as something to manipulate. But that's over now. I'm not going to let you or anyone else take advantage of me anymore." Frank's face darkened, his temper flaring. "You're being irrational, Rachel. This is ridiculous. You're cutting us out of your life completely. This is our family." "I'm protecting my family," I said calmly, my voice steady. "And this is the family I'm choosing to protect now." I looked down at my hands, my resolve unshaken. "I've made my choice, and there's nothing you can do to change it." Frank opened his mouth to protest, but the lawyer raised a hand to silence him. "It's final," he said simply. "There's nothing more to discuss." The tension in the room was suffocating, but I could feel a sense of calm settling over me. I had done it. I had taken control of my life and ensured my baby would be taken care of, no matter what happened in the future. The feeling of empowerment was overwhelming. No longer was I the woman who had been pushed around by guilt and manipulation. I had learned to trust myself, to trust my instincts, and to do what was best for me and my child. Frank and Jason glared at me for a moment longer before standing and storming out of the room without another word. The lawyer and I exchanged a brief glance, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. This battle was over, and I had won. The rest of the meeting was a blur. I signed the final papers, made sure all my legal affairs were in order, and walked out of the office with a sense of finality. As I stood on the sidewalk, the weight of the decision lifted from my shoulders. I had made the right choice. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Jason and Frank might have been furious, but they couldn't take away what was mine. They couldn't manipulate me anymore. I had broken free, and nothing was going to stop me from building the life I wanted. I was going to raise my child in peace, free from the toxicity of the past. And that, above all, was worth it. With my baby in my arms, I finally felt at peace. The past was behind me, and I had created a new, independent life. My inheritance, legal victories, and strength had given me a fresh start. Living in my new home, I found joy in motherhood and the freedom to build a future for us. No more manipulation, no more toxic relationships, just love, security, and the chance to thrive. This was my new life, one I had fought for,